Over the next 45 minutes, we're going to explore with my panelists some of the new labor laws, the immigration policies and global workforce regulations that are reshaping hiring practices, and the compliance requirements that go with them. But really, beneath that fancy title, what we're going to do is look at, in practicality, what do HR leaders, managers, and organizations need to think about, if anything? Like what are some of the real parts? And then we'll talk a lot about sort of how companies have resilience or build resilience and stay a step ahead of new administrations or new regulations. Why is the topic important? Well, there's a lot of regime changes and a lot of new regulations coming in, and these can get pretty overwhelming. And look, compliance in today's world isn't a nice to have, right? It's critical. And with the shifts we're seeing in the US classification rules, changes in labor laws across the UK, Canada, for some to remain, the importance around this geographic talent pool and compliance are key areas for our audience, for yourselves to be attached on. So that's enough of me lining it up. Really pleased to be joined by our expert panel today. So I'm going to introduce them in. First off, I'd like to introduce Anthony Smith, the Chief Human Resources Officer at Certify. Anthony, do you want to bring yourself to the audience?
First and foremost, thanks to Safeguard for having me. And it's a pleasure to be with you all. Cheers from here in Chicago. As I was jokingly telling my fellow panelists, I'm going to hide my New York and New Jersey accent for the next hour so you can understand me a little bit better. But thrilled to be here today. This is an exciting topic. A little bit about my background, as I just indicated, originally from the Northeast. Spent about 10 years in the human capital consulting space with companies such as PricewaterhouseCoopers and some others. And then for the last 15 years, leading various in-house HR organizations. Have had the pleasure of lived and worked in quite a few different countries around the world. So the global nature of the topic is quite fascinating for me. But I'm really looking forward to diving into it with Catherine and Bjorn. And thanks for having me.
Thank you, Anthony. And also joining me is my Chief Human Resources Officer, Catherine Loringer. Catherine.
Thank you, Bjorn. Hi, everybody. It is an absolute pleasure to be here today and talk about this topic. Just a little bit about my background. As Bjorn mentioned, I'm Chief People Officer at Safeguard Global. I'm proud to have been here. Bjorn's 10 years next month. And so I've got about 25 years in HR. The first part of that was heavily focused in US, kind of doing all of the things that all of you have done before. So working my way through the trenches, whether it's operations or recruitment, business partnering, employee relations, dealing with the legalities. So kind of built my career up through, really the kind of grunt work of HR. And then getting up into that strategy component a little bit later in my career. And the last 10 years I've spent in the global space and working with Safeguard as we've expanded. We've learned a lot about how to go global over the last 10 years, and we've helped a lot of clients do that as well. So it's been an incredible learning experience as the market has really changed and as the environment has really changed for us in the global space. So very excited to share what I learned over the years as it relates to some of the current events.
Perfect. So just a little bit of housekeeping. Look, over the next 30, 40 minutes, we're going to run through question and answers. We do want to leave a bit of time open at the end for any questions our audience would have of our panelists. And again, look, please feel free to, they've got sort of great global experience, run large organizations. So please feel free to ask anything. And within their preview, I'm sure they'll be able to answer. So I'm going to start with immigration, right? And changing labor laws. So first off, look, we've seen a lot of talk, specifically here in the US, about H-1B and some really big topics around sort of compliance with that or changing regulations. So, Anthony, I'll start with yourself. Like, at Certify, you get the new administrations, there's going to be new policies. Like, how do you react to that, being in the countries you're in and some of the thing? What's your framework for new immigration policies?
Yeah. It's an agile one, right? And I think that's kind of like the mantra of what HR has been for the last 10 to 15 years. Because I can tell you, immigration law and policy in the US has not been the same over more than, say, a 4 to 6 year period, right? So I think no matter what it is, we have to be able to approach it with a very type of agile type of mindset. And of course, the question is always, well, what is agile? What does agile mean to you? What does it mean to your organization? But I think the biggest question is, what does it mean to your business? So we are obviously looking at what are the potential changes that were coming here, and there's a lot of ways that you can look at it quite differently, and understanding, where are you bringing talent in from, that can maybe help alleviate. You could look at the different levels of your talent that you're bringing in, because obviously with the H-1B, if an individual has a master's, right, that puts them in a separate category to then get additional approvals. But there's a lot of complexity, and I think the biggest thing is, we can plan, but we still have to see what actually comes out and what gets changed. Now, I think we all know with the H-1Bs, it's never been an easy process. And when I say easy process, there's always been an infinite, or not an infinite, there's always been a finite number of H-1Bs in which the government has allowed us to get, right? So you've always had to develop contingency plans. Okay, if the H-1B doesn't get approved in, April, and we can't have the person start in October, what's the backup plan, right? And I think we as organizations, we have to continue to look at what are the backup plans in case it does or it does not.
Now, and Catherine, maybe I'll flex on that. There is like, because backup plans are a great example, right? Like, hey, we want to be able to get visas for here, or bring this talent in. Yeah, how do you partner best with the business to be able to work through that? Like, give great experiences where you've seen business strategy, maybe, like have to have a backup plan around where talent's distributed. And what's the best way to be able to engage with an organization to discuss that?
I think you're spot on when you talk about business strategy. This isn't just an HR strategy. This isn't just, hey, HR, go find me some people, get us some visas. We can meet people in seats. This has to be really partnering with the business to understand the needs. Where do we really need people? What are the requirements of the role? Where can we actually find that talent? A lot of times managers will come in with what they know. They know that in the past, we've brought in people on visas to do these jobs. They've been seated here. That's what works. And a big part of our job is to talk to them and say, let's dive into this a little bit more and think about, what do you really need? Let's open our mind a little bit and say, what if we put it here? Or what if, we brought this type of worker in instead? Maybe what if it wasn't an employee, or what if it was a different location? And it doesn't work every time, everywhere, but we have to ask those questions and follow that kind of list of why to get to the root of what we really need. And that allows us to look at different strategies, because maybe the visa is the right option in this case, but maybe we hire them somewhere else. Maybe that actually even saves the company a little bit of money because we're hiring them in a different location. So partnering with the business in that respect, I think, is the most important thing that we can do. We're not just executing, right? We have to be real business partners.
So again, and then before I continue, I'm going to continue, Anthony. So you've got sort of agile, you've got partnering. How do you keep a talent like so? If I think about the talent acquisition experts, right, and trying to be able to go, all right, well, hey, in an agile world, how do I keep a pipeline of candidates warm? Like, love to hear some of your experiences certify. Like, again, like how does talent how do HR leaders make sure they've got the right talent in the right pools to be able to bring into that pipeline?
Great, but we could probably spend 2 hours on that alone. But actually, I love Catherine's point, and I just wanted to maybe give one or two examples, right? Because we can say like develop backup plans, but I think it's really good to get specific. Like, okay, what backup plans have you actually delivered that were impactful? And I can tell you last year so I joined Certify only 5 months ago. But I can tell you with my prior organizations, one of the big things that we did was we went out and got a blanket L, right? And just to be clear, what an L visa is, it's an intercompany managerial visa. And when you have a blanket, it allows you to go through the process much faster. So if we knew no matter what with an H-1B, the earliest somebody that might be able to start is October, then what we did as a backup plan was to say, okay, let's make sure the individual meets the requirements potentially for an L transfer, managerial position, more than 360 days outside of the country. So this way, if the H-1B didn't get approved, then we could say, okay, it's February 25th. If we keep the individual out of the country for 365 days, could they then come very shortly after on an L visa, right? So we were always trying to look at like different ways that, okay, the H-1B didn't work out, but how could we possibly find something else? And I think Catherine actually just raised another great point too. Like, you know, sometimes you got to go to where the talent is. And we had a situation not long ago where we were looking at an external talent. So to your point, Bjorn, they were in a location that we currently did not have a business entity, so we couldn't employ that individual. But we realized that the individual had dual citizen with another country. And in that other country, we did have a legal entity, and we were able to then hire that individual interim into that other country before then transferring to the US. So like at the end of the day, a lot of what we do in HR is we jokingly say we're superheroes, right? We're problem solvers. And that's where I think, you know, the best HR talent that I've ever worked with are truly problem solvers. Like we figure out ways to get stuff done. And that's a cool part of what we do.
Absolutely. And hey, I love that example as a somebody who came to the US on an L1 visa, and then renewed it before the green card. I'm exceptionally grateful to that policy, but no, equally how hard our teams had to work with the lawyers to get everything on all documented. So, and that leads me nicely. Like that's a beautiful segue to compliance, documentation, visa application, sort of a good. Let me ask you just on there. So, for you both, it's a sort of broader question, right? So, we've seen talk of changes here in the US, but we've also seen Keir Starmer bring employment changes in the UK. There's sort of decentralized of employment in Canada. So a lot of changing landscapes, right? Where you've already got existing employee populations or worker populations, how do you all stay ahead of compliance? How do you assess risk? How do you assess change and bring that back to the business? Catherine, love to start with that with you, and then Anthony, we can jump through.
It's a never-ending saga. Let's just say you have to be diligent all the time. And we have employees in 57 countries right now. So staying compliant is no small task. I think the biggest thing is that you just have to stay diligent. You can't just relax and expect everything to stay the same. You have to actively understand what's happening in each of those regions. My people cannot be experts in every single country that they cover. I can't put an individual HR person for our internal team in every country. So they need to have resources available to them, whether that's using technology and AI and databases and finding out what the updates are, or utilizing our partners to make sure that our vendors, our brokers, our attorneys are getting us the updates that we need. Sometimes outsourcing is actually a great thing because we can defer some of that risk and work with those other partners to make sure that we're doing the right things. But you just can't stop paying attention. And we know that compliance is one of the key things that we need to do because that's one of the primary ways that we're going to reduce risk in our organization.
Yeah, love that. Anthony, over to you at Certify. What do you guys think about, and what keeps you up at night?
Still some of Catherine's answer because I thought it was spot on. It's so much around just anticipation, right? Like if I think about where a Certify is currently at is, in some of our locations, we're really close to hitting that works council and everything else, but then puts us into that next tier. And then what does that then trigger, and what type of audits does that trigger? And, so I think we always have to be aware of kind of where our business currently is at. And this kind of comes back into human capital planning and business planning and workforce planning to say like, okay, we have this many employees in this location today. What do we anticipate it to be at a year from now? How does that overall impact our business structure in that location? So if you're not doing that today, absolutely need to be. But it's so funny because I'm thinking about like GDPR, right? GDPR was like 10 years ago, that huge buzz, and like all of a sudden it lit the world on fire. And everybody felt like they were caught off guard. We shouldn't have been caught off guard. We were talking about GDPR for like 20 years, right? And then it finally just got to the point where it's going to be enforced. And I think it's the same now, right? Everything that we're hearing, it's not like it just got baked up 6 months ago, right? These are things that have been in the process for several years, most likely. And it's just, is our business now ready to be impacted by it, right? And if it is, then how do we make sure we get in front of it? But I agree with Catherine, right? You can't scale an HR operation by having expertise in local market in every market you do business in, especially if you have a smaller subset of employees. And that's where you have to rely on external guidance, whether it's through the partners of Safeguard or whatever it may be. But that's how we use it as well. So we are a partner with Safeguard for some of our employees in various locations, and we very much rely on our partners here to help make sure that we're running a compliant business and employee practice in those locations.
Love that. It's one of those, I saw a stat of like how many global employment law regulations changed across, I think it was a subset of 100, and it's in the thousands, right? It's like thousands of employment law changes year over year. And it's one of those, again, you can't, to Catherine's point, you can't be master of all, but you need to have the framework to go, okay, to your point, what does that come through? I'm curious, and I know the answer for ourselves. So Anthony, I'll come back to you here. Compliance, distributed workforce, you're changing policies. Again, as we think about the modern workforce, right? And we've talked on this a little bit around there. We're talking about some large population centers, some countries are smaller. To me, that's all around accessing this global talent pool. And I'd love first off to get sort of a maybe of like how many countries you're in, like what's your talent strategy at a certified?
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to answer. Well, if you don't mind, I'm going to walk you a little bit backwards on how we got here. So as of only 10 short months ago, or even less, Certify was owned by American Express, and we are part of a private equity spinoff. So over the last, I'd say 8 months, essentially part of my remit in the organization has been standing up our own HR practice, right? Because it's no longer part of Amex. So with that, we had to go from operating tens and tens and tens of thousands of employees around the world to now Certify has approximately about 1,000 employees with our own entities in 7 countries. But once again, we have employees more than those 7 in which we partner with Safeguard on. And to your point, Bjorn, some of them are countries with higher density populations, some of them are with smaller density populations, but sometimes it doesn't matter how many employees you have, like the regulations are the regulations, and you still have to, be aware of what they are and help make sure that you're navigating that quite well.
Perfect. Sorry, you were just going to keep going.
Oh, no, please go ahead. Please.
Well, I was just going to say it, and then that's a great sort of backstory. A lot of topical on hybrid, remote, return to office, and as we think about distributed talent, where from a certified point of view, why don't you give us a bit of backstory on, how you all operate?
Yeah, I would love to. So I'm a huge fan and believer of you go to where the talent is, right? So to me, you have a business need, you bring in the best person that can help you solve that business need. But now you also have to look through it through the lens of the business and understanding, does it support and work for your business? Now, the nature of a certified and our solution to the market is we are fraud detection, right? So anytime, we have the opportunity, and we're very fortunate to work with quite a few of the top 100 companies in the world, right? And essentially what our solution is, somebody steals your credit card and they try to go buy a brand new pair of Nikes. Well, guess what? Hopefully that's where we're catching it and we're making sure it doesn't happen. So coming back to the nature of our business, we do have a primarily in-office environment, primarily because part of our requirements is to ensure that all of that data that we see, so when we see a transaction go through, we see an individual's social security number, their bank details, their home address, we need to make sure that all of that data is processed in a very secure environment. And let's be honest, sometimes when we work from home, that's not the most secure environment. So because of the nature of our business, a lot of it does require in-office, right? In-office. With that said, not all roles require that. So we're actually currently working with Safeguard to expand into a new country because that's where one of the talents is that we realize could have a big impact on our business. So I think to wrap it up, it's understand what your business requirements are, push on it, right? If it doesn't make sense, go to where the talent is. If it does make sense, then you got to do what's best for the business.
Anthony, I think you give a really good example that, within one business, it's not one way or the other. It's not I'm for or against remote work or I'm for or against hybrid. within one single organization, you can have multiple needs. And you really need to look at each of those pockets and say, what is the best way for us to manage our talent? Are we doing part-time work? Are we doing job sharing? Are we doing hybrid work? I mean, there's so many different talent pools that we might not tap. And we shouldn't just apply a one size fits all to our organization just because we say we do this, therefore we must. We've looked at that in our organization as well. There's a few roles that need to be in the office for one reason or another. But if not, then we want to give our employees the ability to work in the way that's best for them.
It's a curious one. We have, as Catherine said, like we have, choice. We give people the choice, right? Come in, not a, for us. I love coming to the office. I go every day. Like like for me, it's something that still I'm of that generation that still loves coming in and having the separation. But I love being in an organization where people have that choice and flexibility. And on that, like, so Catherine, to you, like where you've got, again, there's a lot of differences. You got the Jamie Dimons coming in. You got like lots of voices being heard in this debate. I think it's going to settle to where you both said, like, where organizations feel best, that's what they're going to do. One of the questions that a lot of the audience may ask is like, where you've got a hybrid, right? How do you bring policies to that, right? Like, so what's the future policy direction look like where you've got some people that are remote and have the flexibility to choose their hours or choose option, and some that are office based? How much conflict does that cause for HR leaders, or does it not?
Interestingly, I don't think we've seen a lot of conflict there. And a big reason for that is, I think, because we have to look at things in an outcome-based way, right? It's not that we're going to do something because this is the way we do it. We have to treat our employees as adults, and they need to understand their job and their role and what they bring to the organization. And then our job is to give them a framework that they can do that in a productive and efficient way that they can also enjoy. And if we can build that outcome-based framework, then it doesn't matter if you're home or in the office because you understand where you fit in the business, you understand what you need to do. So it makes our job a whole lot easier if we look at it that way.
And Anthony, you're firing that straight over to yourselves as you think about it. Again, you've got a good balance between some homes and there. Is there any challenges sort of maintaining cultural cohesion or policies around that for you that you see?
So far, we have not encountered too much challenge, right? I think one, I love Catherine's point around like, look, we're as long as we're delivering what we need to deliver, right? Let's be flexible, right? We're very much outcome based. But I think, what I've read in the news where there's been organizations that are telling their people that have to come back, and then there's a big uprising about, like, I just find it breaks down the lack of communication. Like what I just gave as an example, right? Here is why a certified needs you to be in the office. In order for us to pass our audits, right, and for us to pass certain requirements with regards to data, we have to do it in a controlled environment. And that's why. And as long as everybody's very clear from the very start of the offer at the employment through the employment process, if we communicate really well, I find that usually helps alleviate a lot of these challenges.
Yeah, there's a lot of noise out there. We have to determine which voices deserve us listening to them. I mean, and the big one is our employees.
Yeah, so it's curious. I was on a podcast, and I think the podcast is that talking about this balance of kind of coming into this new era is one where, like, for example, you've got the Jamie Dimon speaking their mind. They're not concerned with speaking their mind about how they feel about their employees, and if the employees don't like it, get off the bus, right? Or you've got some of these big notices coming out doing that, like, hey, this is how we're going to be from now on. If you don't like it, there's the door. And they were kind of talking on there. I'd be interested to get your view as we've gone through a period where their view is like employees have run the roost, and now that CEOs are taking the balance back. I don't agree. Like, I think we've come to probably a great middle ground where we think, hey, everybody's an adult, and how best do we bring this new work work partnership together. One shouldn't be more dominant than the other. If I want the best people, then I've got to attract the best people. So, I see it that way. But I'd be curious on your views on that. Like, are we in an age of new sort of CEO or C-suite directive and taking back the balance of power, or how do you see it now?
I think it's to your point. I think the pendulum was way over here, and I give the example, right? When I had my children, I had a certain amount of PTO days. They didn't recognize at-home work, and like 3 days after my kids were born, I was back in the office working, right? And obviously that's not ideal for anybody, right? And then all of a sudden COVID hit, and the pendulum swung way over here. And I think to your point, Bjorn, I think it's now like normalized. In my view, it's kind of come to where it should have just naturally always been, with hybrid arrangements. Business does best works for business. We allow flexibility, and that's to me, I think it's landing at a really good spot.
Cool. Catherine, any?
Yeah. No, I agree with that. I think we're seeing a few maybe rubber band snaps out of the media, right? We're seeing some shocking statements and well, instead of just being the pendulum, right? It's just kind of like there's some folks out there that just want to shock everybody, and it makes us feel like it almost sets an illusion that we're going in this direction. But I don't think that that's real. I think it is much more the way that Anthony has been stating it, that you're getting this good balance now between the employees and the employer.
And let me, I'll give two, but let me ask you before I circle back on that, is as we think about this globally, right? So like the topic is a global. Are there countries that you've seen that it's more normalized, right, to be office based? Like, so have kind of avoided this. There's people in countries that are going, like, well, of course it's normal for us to be in an office. We've never changed. Like, or is it fairly global? Like, as our listeners think about this on Activate, talking to global talent, and they're going to go, well, hey, you got to be in an office. Like, is the remote hybrid work, again, forgetting industry specific where you may have to, but is it generally spread across there and it's a great perk for everybody, or are there some countries that is just not business norm and people would find it very alien? Anthony, have you experienced any of that?
Great question. I think 2019, you probably absolutely would have had those countries that it just wasn't feasible. Like, I'm thinking about maybe certain countries in Africa where you have those rolling blackout waves of electricity, and it made it really hard if somebody wasn't working in an office to be able to continuously support the business. Then COVID came and everybody had to be home, right? And then all of a sudden everybody has backup generators and they got extra battery packs for their laptops and all this type of stuff, right? So I think there's probably still certain locations where you find a little bit more focused on in office, but I think the last 5 years it's taught us that we were kind of forced into this.
Yeah. And Catherine, I was going to say, you as hiring people in over 57 countries. Again, what's our talent team's experience? Like, is it?
Most people are very excited to be able to work for a business that allows them to either work hybrid or completely remotely. I mean, of course, every once in a while, people are like, I'd love to meet my team in person. I would love to go to a party. But are they going to trade the remote work for that? Absolutely not. Now we just have to wish that some of the countries that we employ in would catch up a little bit, right? So when we talk about, countries maybe lagging or leading on this remote work, we still work in a lot of countries where, from a compliance perspective, to bring it around to that, we have to get wet signatures on documents on a regular basis. So I have to bring people in office, or to sign off on vacation requests, or, so we are still working through some of that kind of latent change in some of these countries, even though the people are ready to move forward.
It's a great, as a signature of a lot of our entities, I feel that and share that pain. Definitely, where you still have to get a wet signature on an employment contract just feels really bizarre to me. But as countries do. But it's interesting though, in some ways, you've seen a lot of this. Definitely, like in the UK, there was talk, and like the US is another example where there's been rhetoric about your federal workers go back to the office, right? it's almost like even government policy feels like it wants to try and get involved in business strategy or business outcomes, which is just a bizarre one to me in general. Before we jump on to the topic, I'm sure I mentioned this before, but Mike, I was an office guy, right? I love people in the office. I love I was old school. But what got to me is just the calculation now. Like we have, like I said, populations of a lot of countries is, there's you can go and calculate people's average commute time, and in some countries that's large. Like we have some of our guardians in India that were traveling an hour and a half to the office, an hour and a half back, and then you kind of go, well, if I calculate how much time that is over a month, which I did, and I looked at that and I was like, I mean, can I ever really feel comfortable with myself making you do that without purpose? If your outcome is good, as your output's good, if you're getting more time for your own individual needs. And I looked at all of our countries and kind of went, I couldn't do that. Like I would just feel terrible doing that. So that was where we got to, is like, now if you want to choose to, great. That's optionality. Like, you have the ability to go to so anyway, so next big topic for me, and I'm really super passionate about this, is we're going to see, and we are seeing, huge leaps in AI technology, and we're seeing that kind of adopted by businesses either formally or informally by people using chat gpt or all of these different topics to get a presentation done, or like prepare for an interview or whatever it would be. um, Myriad of challenges there, right? Definitely like company data, utilizing it, how do we think about it, but it's so accessible and becoming so commonplace. I'm curious, how can HR teams prepare for usage of that internally? Any sort of ethical considerations that you think about? Definitely as we start to move into the era, I'd love to talk about how HR are going to use it. But let me start with, how do you feel about it today? What are you thinking about as HR organizations? Anthony, over to you on that.
Yeah, the first part is really easy for me. I love it. Like
Yeah.
it makes my life so much easier. But I have to be careful because my wife is like, if you wrote this Mother's Day card on behalf of our kids from ChatGPT, you're going to be in a lot of trouble, right? So, uh, like it honestly has made my life tremendously easy, right? And it's a time saver for me, right? There's certain things that I know I can do and it's going to take me 20 minutes, or I can use AI to help support me and it's going to take me 5 minutes. And then I can go focus on something that really requires my expertise and attention, right? So there's a lot of aspects of it that I really, really appreciate. Now, I have to give the disclaimer because we always tell our internal organization here, what you put in ChatGPT goes into the open web, right? So be very careful when you're putting proprietary type of information from your company in there, right? And I heard somebody use an example, fortunately it wasn't with us, but an example of like, hey, here's how we onboard our clients, here's everything, how can we simplify? The minute you put that out there, that's now out there, right? And now other people can start building on that and researching. So you have to be really careful in how you do it. Now, the next segment, how it relates to HR, there's so many ways that, as simple as I need to write a new job description for XYZ. Okay, let me go to ChatGPT. Let it help me give a base on what that job description could be. And then we're going to fine tune it and tweak it based on what's relevant for us. So I'd say that's like almost the first very generic and easy way. As it starts to get more complex, but I think more powerful, is you can now start to get analytics through AI out of, let's say, your HRIS system or out of compliance updates and whatever. So an example that we're looking to build in our own internal AI large language module is for me and HR to be able to go in and say, as a chat, right? And a lot of times, like ChatGPT is a really fancy chatbot, right? With intelligence behind it. So we can very simply go in and say, hey, what is Susie's salary and how does Susie's salary compare to her peers? And while you're looking at it, can you share with me how it compares to external benchmark and give me an analysis back, right? And now it's real time. It should happen within seconds. where historically that would have taken quite a bit of time. So I think what we're going to be able to do as HR leaders is have a lot more information readily available at our fingertips with analytics behind it to then equip us to make better business decisions.
Now, Catherine, on the back of that, and this is one of our general favorite topics around budgeting time, but as you think about sort of AI coming in, how, and we're talking about saving time, how do you think that definitely around knowledge, right, shortens time but increases efficiency, right? Like, as we think about it, how do we use it? But importantly, how do you see that changing some of the efficiency metrics for HR over the coming years?
I think one of the things that we've fought against in HR forever is not being an administrative function. And all the things that Anthony was just talking about are just administrative steps that take our time, when what we really want to do is take that information and work with the business to affect change. Right. So all of those things, whether it's writing a job description or using an LLM to get, analytical information, all of that can benefit us moving forward. So that may mean using AI to talk about, well, we need to fill these holes in our technology team. Where should we hire them? Where is the best talent? What is that going to cost us?
Yeah.
Do we want to look at changes to our workforce to find efficiency, to find better talent? We're going to replace this role. Those are all things that we can start leveraging the technology for. Because if I go to do it myself, what am I going to do? I'm going to Google what's the best place to find engineers and what does it cost? And I can spend hours and get a fraction of the quality of the analytics that I can get out of some of these tools. So I think it's really important that we embrace this. But also, to Anthony's point, we have to verify, right? We can't just assume that everything that comes out of this system is the truth, right?
Yeah.
I love that I can go into Google and it gives me a summary and I don't have to go into every link, but can I fully trust it? If it really matters, I better go in and I better verify that information and make sure it's right. And that's why when we run a job description, we just don't ask for a job description and then post it to the web and say, this is what I'm hiring for. We go through, we apply, real human knowledge to it to make sure that it's what we need. And that's where, Bjorn, I would go back to some of our taglines around, we want to have tech for everything we can, but it's got to be human when it matters.
Correct. Yeah, look, I don't think you can ever get rid of the way I describe it. I'd be curious on Andy is, in fact, I was having this conversation before, like, there's laws or rules, like, hey, here are the employment laws of the UK, and which anything agentic can tell you, right? Because here's a source of data, how do I, but there's also applicability and practice that AI doesn't have knowledge of, which human resources leaders have knowledge of. Is yes, here's the law, but how do I deal with this in practice through all of the years of experience that you can't replicate today? I think is how I see it. Andy, I'd be curious if you see it the same way.
I agree. It's like a springboard, right? It kind of springs you out of like that first 50% of the drudgery of needing to research, but then exactly now you got to use just human intelligence to audit and verify. And I was going to say, like, I once heard a quote and I absolutely love it, especially as we look at our over dependence on AI, right, or technology. But somebody once said, you can't wire the world when you short circuit the soul. And it means like we're still humans at the end of the day, right? We still crave relationship, like Bjorn, you talked about in office, right? I'm sure a lot of that was just the human interaction and connection. And it's still so powerful. So I would really implore you, and I'm sorry, I'm jumping back to the remote work. And if you do have a fully remote work, then you really have to have a very strong talent engagement strategy on how you are connecting your people around the world, because we crave that type of connection. So, but coming back to the topic at hand, yes, you always need, our human brains to be able to kind of go in and do that final check and analysis.
I love that. I have I speak a bit on neurons, but I have pretty interesting ADHD. So I need people around me, like, just to get my dopamine levels in and go into a dancing, or else I on my own I like suck. Don't have the input. We bounced there, but I loved it because actually there's a thing around, if the world is around distributed talent, we talked about talent engagement strategies, and I believe AI is actually the advancement in AI tech will become one of those engagement strategies that help for asynchronous work. I'd love to just tell the audience before we go into questions from a certified point of view, and then Catherine, I'll bounce to you. Yeah, how do you do talent engagement today, right? Like, especially as you've got populations in smaller organizations, how do you all think about that today, and where do you see it going in the future?
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, we're really at a critical time because as we're spinning out of Amex and we're about post that transaction, we really had to think about, many people and many talents will join an organization because of the brand, right?
Yeah.
People will join Safeguard because it's one of the leaders in the ER space, right? People will join Amex because it's one of the leaders in the financial space. And then all of a sudden you go through a transition like what we're going through is you now have talent that are thinking, well, wait a second, that's not the company you joined. And I had that when I joined PwC because part of Sarbanes-Oxley, our unit in PwC got spun off. So I can tell you firsthand, I've been a part of it. And you question, like, is this now going to be a company, right? We're now part of a privately owned company and it's going to change new muscles in the company. And that's change can be a little bit intimidating and daunting. So the first thing we need to do is it comes back to, and I mentioned earlier, so much around communication, right? What does the future hold for us? How do we see it? How do we make sure that we're clear on our vision and our purpose and our strategy with you all? And then to me, those frequent touch points are absolutely critical. So for us, obviously you get to your basics, right? Making sure you're running your employee engagement surveys, you're creating your ERGs, employee resource groups across your company. We're about to have, our Global Women's in Leadership Day coming up in 2 weeks, right? So how are we making sure that we're touching that audience and we're touching this audience as we go and we work through our global populations? The next part, as I would say, is be so incredibly culturally aware of where you do business. It's so important. So for instance, I know in India, we have Holi coming up, right? How are you as a leadership team, wherever you're based, in the US, UK, Spain, doesn't matter. How are you engaging with your talent and celebrating in those important days? You just had Independence Day in India where it was 75-year mark, right? How are you doing that? And I think, look, if you really want to build an engaged organization, show your people you really care about them, and it's going to start there.
Love that.
Yeah, but very well said. I would echo everything that you've said right there, and especially down to the point of understanding the different locations and the different cultures. I was going to say inclusion's not a dirty word. It's,
I love that too.
And I think tactically too, we have always been an organization that's led with our values, right? Always. So we try to start that journey from the very beginning, whether it's your interaction with the talent acquisition team and they're interviewing in line with, are you going to add to our value structure? And then when you come into the business, how we onboard and how we bring people in and show how the way we do business is very in line with our values. We train our managers so that all their interactions with their people are also reinforcing those values. So what we want is that every interaction that someone has in our business with someone else in our business or with their clients, we are always putting those values first. So we have this consistent framework of who we are and what our culture is, even if you're not sitting next to someone in the office.
Now I'll play contrarian because that's again a thing. So get it, hear it, communication.
Oh, I didn't hear that, Bjorn.
Yeah.
Can you repeat that?
Okay, we can't hear Bjorn. Actually, I'm just gonna, while he's fixing his mic, I had a thought, and actually, Catherine, you just touched on something that I love. You used the word "add," right? And I think so much of the time, we don't focus on the adding in, right? We focus on what we want it to be, and then you kind of create like an echo chamber, you're stale, right?
Yeah.
And I'll give the example. I can't tell you how many times I've had a hiring manager say to me, I think they're going to be a great cultural fit, right? And a lot of times when I hear somebody say that is I hear somebody saying, exactly, I think they're going to take decisions like me. I think I could see myself having a drink at the bar with them, right? Or whatever it may be. rather than saying, I see them as somebody that's going to challenge the way I think. I see somebody that's going to add this into our organization, and that's what I want, right? So I think that word add is so critical when you talk about culture and when you talk about inclusion. It's really powerful.
Yeah, I completely agree with you on that. And one of our values is being disruptive and empowerment, right? And that's something that we try to teach our managers, especially as they come up through the ranks, that you do want, I heard someone said to me like a long time ago, right? You want to surround yourself with people who are better than you, that are smarter than you, right? And some managers are afraid to hire someone who's smarter than them, but that's exactly what you want, are people who challenge and that you can delegate to and that can really run with things in the business.
Yeah, couldn't agree more.
You know that
You're back.
you know what's bizarre? We're talking about offices. Catherine's right next door to me, so I lost signal and she didn't. There we go. That's the odds of being a webinar host. Thank you for jumping in. I was just going to try to play contrarian. Like, there is no doubt, and you're going to hear it there as we think about communication and talent, that there are definitely some factors that are much easier in person than in a remote and distributed workforce, right? What do you think are the top three challenges you see for?
Oh no, we lost the sound again. Top 3 challenges.
Top three
Three challenges for something.
for
Yeah.
remote work.
Okay.
Okay. Catherine, maybe we'll go back and forth. I'll come up with one,
Sure.
and you come up with one, then we'll come up. Right? How would that be?
Sounds good to me.
Top 3 challenges for remote work. Coming back to that. Oh, there we go. That's even better.
Well, there's one of the benefits right there.
I think one, it's sometimes when you lose that interaction, that face to face, you can lose a little bit of the intent behind certain interactions, right? And I always I always joke. Are you familiar with the 5 love languages, the book, The 5 Love Languages? It talks about how we like to give and receive love in different ways, whether it's physical touch, quality time, acts of service, right? There's so many ways. And I jokingly say my wife's love language is very different than mine. So like at the end of today, I'm going to go home and I'm going to try to help her get the kids to bed, do the dishes, do the laundry, because my love language is acts of service. Hers is words of affirmation. So what she wants to hear is me say, I thought you did an amazing job handling that situation, and our kids are so lucky to have you as a mom, right? So my whole point is sometimes when it's fully remote and you don't have these personal interactions, you could be on just completely different waves with people, right? And virtually we sometimes do that. And then it could create more barriers or more challenges than maybe could have been there if it was an in-person type of relationship.
Yeah, and I think that gets exacerbated by our meeting schedules, right? When you start putting back-to-back 30 minutes, 30-minute hour-long meetings packed with information, because that's the only time you're going to talk to that person all day, you stop taking those first couple of minutes and say, how are you? What's going on with you? And learning how people want to communicate. So there's a lot of people you may interact with on a regular basis, but you may not know them at all.
You know what? It's interesting. We to support our work this year as a leadership team, especially, but we said we're going to stop doing a lot of meetings. Like, so we really looked at our meeting calendars and just took them out and said, okay, let's not have all of this structure. And as we've evolved into remote and hybrid work, we're looking at different methods of how do we stay connected, communicate, but without them. And I'm going to say it's transformed the way that we operate, because you're then getting meaningful time in your days to go, what do I need, and having meaningful conversations rather than just bouncing. So that's good. Now it'd be remiss, so from a time check, we've got 10 minutes left. We did say we'd throw it open to any questions, so I need to be able to check. We do have some in the Q&A. So from Eli, how can companies build regulatory resilience and prepare for future labor changes? I will throw that to Anthony, you first.
Yeah. Okay, so I'll attack the regulatory in a moment, right? I think it was so interesting. I was having a conversation with somebody not long ago that works in supply chain. And with the new administrative policies that are coming out, so in the US, they're looking to do a lot more taxation on imports, right? And when I was speaking with this individual, they said their business now started overloading the number of import goods like this quarter to try to avoid the potential taxes, which was putting a massive strain on the business, right? Now, did they have enough people, right, to be able to handle all that and so forth? So I think the biggest thing we can do is really understand what are some of these changes, whether it's tariffs, whether it's labor law, what is the overall impact it's going to have on our business? And then how do we make sure that we're then partnering? And I heard Catherine talk about her background in business partnering. How do we then partner with our businesses to understand what are your biggest headwinds in which you're going to face? And then how do we bring a people solution to then solve those headwinds? So I'd probably say that that's probably the first approach, is really understanding the impact it's going to have on the business.
And when I think about resiliency, whether that's related to compliance or talent or almost any topic that we can talk about, I think of things like diversification and I think of agility. So I think, okay, well, it's the all your eggs in one basket thing, right? If I have all my people in one place or I'm relying on one particular thing and the laws change there, where does that leave me, right? I either have to deal with that and maybe that puts a big strain on my business, or I have to start rebuilding in a different way somewhere else. Where if we kind of take a broader look at first, we say, well, we're going to have some of this here and some of this here. It gives us the opportunity to flex as things change. And we're not stuck behind the curve because we weren't anticipating something. We've already got options that we can lever a little bit more one way or the other. And then having that agility to do that and asking the questions, being a little scrappy sometimes and going, why? Why do we have to do it that way? And coming up with new ways of doing things.
And then no, I love that. Scrappy HR is I'm going to take. Today we've heard kind of like so there's a key thing. And I've really taken it from like it's like partnering with the business, agility to circumstance, I'm going to say to it, because it could be regulatory, it could be situational, but the need for HR departments to be agile, to partner. And then I think, James, to Catherine and Bjorn, there we go. Well done, someone in the background. There's resilience for you, right? Like you have a thing, we've been resilient, but resilient, right? So some of the big topics, so taking out of here, we've covered a lot of areas. As our audience is sitting through this, we're talking through, what else, like from a top of mind for the industry, for the function, like for HR leaders, what are your predictions for the next year? I'm going to throw ball in because people. I'm going to ask a question for the audience on behalf of them that they haven't asked yet. Anthony, like what are the top of mind for yourself, for HR leaders, as you look out over the coming year?
Yeah, I think there's two things. I'd say two key things to focus on, let me go three. Sorry, I'll go three. I'll add one more. One is you have to identify if you have any single point of failure within your business, right? From a people standpoint, right? As HR leaders, that is our job to make sure that we're setting our businesses up for success. And that includes now ensuring that you're doing proper succession planning. It then automatically starts to create career development discussions with your employees, which then leads to engagement. So you're going to tackle a lot of items there through that one exercise. But I think you have to look at business continuity in looking at single point. Two is, we in HR, we have to continuously be looking at our tech stack, right? And then we have to make sure that our tech stack is supporting the growth of our organization and it's helping us scale faster. And to Catherine's point earlier, right? How do we get out of the administrative landscape and start actually focused? Now that gets into how well integrated are the different components of our technology. And then the third one is back to around engagement, right? And to me, if you do not have a clearly defined employer value proposition, that should probably be one of your top 3 goals for this year.
Perfect. And then, Catherine, I threw Anthony out first. Like, is there anything else you'd add that yourself or your community are really looking at and going, hey, these are areas ahead we're going to have to tackle, and we've got to start thinking on now to prepare for what's coming?
Well, besides agreeing with everything that Anthony's already said, I think too, we need to stop thinking of HR manages our employees. We need to look at managing our workforce, right? And our workforce is a lot bigger than that. These days, it may be gig workers, it may be independent contractors, it may be fixed term employees. There's a whole lot of people that contribute to what we do, and we need to broaden that and figure out how we're going to leverage that in the best way.
Love that. Look, I think that could be a great topic for a further one, is like, worker categorization that actually adds an employee is not employee. There's so many functional paths to that.
It's a scary place for us. We try to stay away from it, but in the end, if we want good results, we're going to have to manage it in totality.
Taking it back from procurement. I love that. Like the total idea of like total workforce compensation is fascinating to me. Thank you. It's been really vibrant, and I appreciate you all being resilient while we had some technical issues and taking over the lead. So to my guests, Anthony, Catherine, appreciate the content, appreciate the collaboration, and to our audience, I hope you all found it useful. We look forward to following up if you have any further questions, and then we'll look forward to the next in the series of webinars coming shortly. Appreciate you all. Thank you, Anthony. Have a great day.
Thanks, Anthony.
Bye, everyone.